Good
morning, members. This is the appointed time for the meeting. Members, there are 3 items. Funding proposals put forward by the administration on the agenda today, and these will be for members' consideration. I'd like to remind members that if you have direct or indirect pecuniary interests related to the discussion items on the agenda today, please disclose the nature of such interests before you speak on those items according to 83A of the Rules of Procedure. And I will also draw your attention to 84 of Rules of Procedure that with regard to the voting on items where you have direct pecuniary interest. First item on the agenda, Head 708, Capital Subventions and Major Systems and Equipment. Paper, PWSC 2015-16-1. Expansion of the Hong Kong Red Cross Blood Transfusion Service Headquarters. Members are invited to recommend to the Finance Committee the upgrading of 67 mm to Cat A at an estimated cost of $893.1 million in money of the day prices for the expansion of the Hong Kong Red Cross Blood Transfusion Service Headquarters. The administration consulted the panel on health services on the 17th of November, and members supported the project, and the gist of the discussion of the panel is tabled for members' information. Attending for this item, we have officials from the Food and Health Bureau, ASD, the Hong Kong Red Cross Blood Transfusion Service, and also Hospital Authority. Now the floor is open for members' questions, if members have any questions. Members who have indicated that they would like to speak include Mr. Sin Chung Kai. Mr. Sin, I have a very short question. It is not related to the paper. Well, let us invite Professor Sylvia Chan to introduce the paper. Yes, I will be very brief. Yes, please be brief. This item is for the expansion of the Hong Kong Red Cross Blood Transfusion Service headquarters, and the estimated cost is $893.1 million. The major works include expanding the existing BTS headquarters in situ to provide improved and appropriate facilities. We would be strengthening existing facilities, and we are going to expand and also build new facilities. There will be new technical laboratories to be set up, and also there is a red cell and platelet reference laboratory. We are going to build a new 8-story annex block connected to the existing building, and at stage 2 we are going to rearrange the functional layouts of the existing building, including removal of the existing partition walls for expanding the lower ground floor upon moving out of the existing facilities. The time frame is that we'd like to complete stage 1 in late 2018 and stage 2 in the 3rd quarter of 2020. The BTS was built in 1984. So in terms of the complexity and also the volume of blood handled, there has always been increases. And it is expected that with the aging of the population and also other increase in demand, we think there will be an increase in demand for blood to the tune of 15 to 20%, and I urge members to support the project. Thank you, Professor Chan. Mr. Sin, I think this is a necessary project from the medical point of view that is undoubtable, and I'm not going to ask those questions. However, when you assist international organizations to set up their headquarters in Hong Kong, how do you draw up the criteria. Okay, the BTS comes along and we fund them. And what about the Médecins Sans Frontières, or what about other relief organizations? In what circumstances are we going to support such expansion projects, and in what circumstances not? Professor Chan. Thank you, Mr. Sin. The entire management of the BTS is part of the work of the Hospital Authority. It belongs to the Kowloon Central area of the Hospital Authority's work. This is number one. And secondly, this is the only one place that collects, processes, and distributes blood for Hong Kong. It looks after Hong Kong's public and private hospitals. If you talk about the Buddhist hospital or other hospitals that work together with the Hospital Authority, if there is another organization, then in terms of expansion projects, those organizations also have to foot part of the bill. Generally speaking, they take up 20% of the bill. But it is possible that if they have difficulty in making other people donate to them or fundraising, then we can allow them to just do their best. Normally speaking, the Hospital Authority works in close liaison with them. I'd like to ask about the balance sheet. Who owns the assets? Professor Chan, can I defer to Mr. Donald Lee of the Hospital Authority to answer the question? Is it Dr. Lee? No, Mr. Donald Lee. Chief Manager, Hospital Authority. Chairman, after the project is over, is completed, the assets would belong to the Buddhist hospital. We are talking about the Hong Kong Red Cross Blood Transfusion Service Headquarters. Well, the assets would belong to the Hong Kong Red Cross BTS. Why don't you answer Mr. Sin's question? The focus of his question is whether we are making use of public money to support an international organization which sets up a facility in Hong Kong. Professor Chan, can you be clearer with the answer? I think this is Mr. Sin's concern. Yes, I get it. The service of this facility is for all people in Hong Kong and also for Hong Kong's public and private hospitals. Therefore, we have always done this. Thank you. If international NGOs target Hong Kong with their services, then you always support them. Is that right? Where do you draw the line? Do you have a line? Professor Chan, this is the Hong Kong Red Cross BTS. How does this connect with the International Red Cross? Or would you like Dr. Lee Chok Kwong to help you out? Is this an international organization? Yes, it is. Maybe I can defer to Dr. Lee Chok Kwong. Dr. Lee, please. Certainly, Chairman. The Hong Kong Red Cross is part of the China Red Cross. We, of course, partake of the International Red Cross, but the BTS mainly serves Hong Kong patients by providing blood to them. Our relationship with the International Red Cross is only one of organizational structure, but the Hong Kong BTS is part of the Hong Kong medical delivery service system. I think Mr. Sin was trying to help you out. He was asking who would own the assets after the project is completed. This is a very simple question. Can you give a direct answer? Mr. Sin, sorry. I shouldn't be taking words out of your mouth. Well, maybe I'm mistaken. I thought the Hong Kong Red Cross is directly under the International Red Cross, but now I think it is under the China Red Cross. So the Hong Kong Red Cross is just a friendly organization to the International Red Cross. Is China Red Cross part of International Red Cross? Well, in the past, we took part in the activities of the International Red Cross. Basically, the BTS activities are pegged to the Hong Kong Medical Service System. Your time is up. If you like, you can line up for a second round. Secondly, Lo Ai Kwok. First, I'd like to declare that I am a member of the Hospital Authority Board. But as you know, it is a kind of voluntary service and I'm not remunerated, so I do not have any pecuniary interest involved. I certainly absolutely support the expansion because the Hong Kong Red Cross serves the people of Hong Kong, and it's important that we have blood transfusion service because it saves people. I have a brief question. The expansion project is quite a huge one. Now, in the process, will there be any impact on regular service? And will there be arrangements made to ensure that regular service is not affected? And also from the paper, we understand that there will be an increase of a recurrent cost to the tune of $90 million. Does it mean that you need to increase manpower? Can I please ask this short question? Professor Chen? Thank you, Mr. Low, for your question. Number one, on service, since this is to be done in 2 stages, so there shouldn't be a lot of impact on existing services. In fact, we are going to increase services in a new block. In terms of manpower, it is expected that there will be an increase. At present, at the BTS headquarters, there are 241 people working, and after expansion, it is expected that there will be 264 people working there, and they are mainly administrative and allied professionals, allied medical professionals. Next, Mr. Yip Kwok Him. Thank you, Chairman. I think it is necessary to expand the BTS headquarters, as can be evidenced in Para 7. This is a center that helps patients in need in Hong Kong. The BTS will be providing blood transfusion and distributing blood to patients, and they also do a lot of research. But my concern is that in Para 11, to address the space shortage and outdated design, which may pose potential risks of blood products contamination as well as occupational hazards. Now, you say you want to upgrade the service to international standards so that you can solve this problem. I'd like to ask for more information about this headquarters building so members will know how this serious problem can be resolved.
That is in terms of design. Can you give us more details? You only mention services to be provided by the expanded portion. So can you tell us the facilities and services for the whole building? Professor Chan, Mr. Chairman, I can say something about existing and new services, and later the HA can supplement. For example, we have the cord blood bank, the cellular therapy laboratory, tissue typing laboratory, nucleic acid test laboratory, etc. These are new facilities, and there will also be a public cord blood bank as well as data for hematopoietic stem cells. At the moment, we only have 8,000 odd square meters, which is not enough, and very often we have to place our freezers and refrigerators, etc., along the corridors. And in future, we'll have 18,000 odd square meters, doubled the present. So our workflow can be enhanced such that the contaminants will not be so easily prone to cross infection. The workflow will be a one-direction one, which will reduce cross-contamination. So that is the direction of our laboratory design. So at the moment, the major problem is related to space, right? You only have 8,000 odd square meters. So placement and storage are your problems at the moment, right? Yes, so I support this project, Chairman. Next, Mr. Frankie Yik. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask about this 8-story block. What's the total height? I can't find it from the paper. Mr. Lee from Hospital Authority. Mr. Lee? $67 MPD. What is the height of each story? It's very difficult to understand MPD. 4.5 meters for each story. Thank you, Chairman. Next, Mr. Tony Zhe. Thank you, Chairman. This is about expansion, Chairman. Just now, a colleague asked about the inadequate space and outdated design. Of course, for inadequate space, you can expand the space, and the existing building will be refurbished and renovated. What do they mean by design? The design of the building or the design of the equipment and laboratories in the BTS headquarters? As for the existing and new design, is it that the leveling of each floor is not the same? And will the design of the new block have to match with that of the existing one? Will they be subject to constraints then? In future, well, at present, they have around 10,000 square meters. But after the expansion, they'll have a park by side. So for this Hong Kong Red Cross BTS headquarters, I can see that the park is rather narrow. It's just like a strip, which is not so easy to use. So have they considered this? Professor Chan? Thank you, Chairman. Well, for this BTS headquarters and the donor center, we adopt a three-pronged approach. We would like to attain our goal in terms of design and construction. First of all, we'd like to have more floor space, such that more crowded facilities can be improved, and then we can have expansion and further development. Secondly, we'll introduce new equipment and technology as well as facilities. We would like to attain the highest cost effectiveness, and the laboratories can be enhanced to international standard, and will take care of safety and quality as well. Thirdly, as the building itself is rather crowded at the moment, so we would like to have a safer and more spacious work environment for the storage of blood samples, etc. And the risks for our staff members during their working hours can be reduced. What's your other question? Well, for the existing and new building, if I may refer you to enclosure 7. Well, can the floors match between the old and new building? Mr. Lee? Well, they're different. At the moment, we actually need a higher floor height. At the moment, it's around 3 odd meters now, or in future it will be 4.5 meters. The ground floor will be connected, but not levels 1 and 2. Well, what do you mean by that? I don't know how you're going to connect them, because if you're talking about different levels, are you going to use, for example, staircase to connect them? well, you must have medium and long plans in terms of connectivity, because the existing building may have to be redeveloped as well in future. And Mr. Chairman, for enclosure 1, if you look at the left side of the drawing, you see the Kings Park recreation ground. It's rather narrow. Have they ever considered the whole site? Maybe in future the Kings Park recreation ground can be improved. The existing building has a floor area of around 10,000 square meters. Well, but the whole site is 80,000 square meters, or 80,000 square feet, around 7,000 square meters. So in the medium and long term, they should look for a better design. Maybe I should wait for another round. Well, I'll ask them to answer this question first. Well, Mr. Chairman, although levels 1 and 2 will not be connected, they are not for laboratory facilities for daily use. They're mainly for officers, so connectivity is not that important. That's the basis of our design. As for the Kings Park Recreation Ground, it's not under the Hospital Authority. It's under the LCSD. In fact, the LCSD has already been lending part of their site to the Red Cross BTS headquarters. I don't think you've answered the question in full. It depends on whether Mr. Jie would like to queue up for a second round. Mr. Chan Chi-chun, thank you, Chairman. For this BDS headquarters, according to the paper, it was built in 1984, over 30 years ago. According to the paper, in terms of quantity, scope of services, as well as quality of services, it needs upgrading. Paragraph 10 says that the headquarters has been in place for over 30 years and upgrading is needed. Apart from hardware, software needs upgrading as well. For blood donation, I have to say that I had been previously rejected by them because I was once engaged in homosexual behavior among males. Well, I also think that policy is outdated. Well, blood is more needed these days, so why is it the Red Cross is rejecting blood donation? FDA of the USA, at the end of last year, made a prior notice that the prohibition order as such will be dropped. And in the UK, Australia, and Italy, they've dropped that already. That is, within a year's time, male homosexuals will be allowed to donate blood. Now, 2 odd years ago, I was rejected, and then I reflected this to Dr. Yok Chow of the EOC and Dr. Ko-Wing Man. Well, apart from the building being outdated, your policies are also outdated. Have you reviewed this? If so, what's the progress? If not, why? Professor Chan, I'd like to thank Mr. Chan for repeating this policy for reference. Perhaps I should defer to Dr. Lee of the Red Cross. Dr. Lee, thank you, Chairman. For this BTS, we regularly review our blood donation policy. As for male homosexuals, we've been discussing the issue every year. We understand that recently the USA has made a prior announcement that the policy will be dropped. We'll review the latest figures and our policies. I believe we'll look at Hong Kong statistics as well as the background information and suggestions from other jurisdictions before changing our policy. Mr. Chan, well, you should actively consider this issue. We'll give you money to upgrade your hardware as well as technology and services. You have to make sure that your technology is advanced enough. Will not be lagging behind the US, the UK, and Australia. Well, this building is over 30 years old. Your policy is also over 30 years old. So you should review your policy as well. So you should review your policy at the same time when you review your hardware. So what do you mean by pressing need is up to you to define. So would you please consider that? Next, Mr. Christopher Chung. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask about the works involved. For example, items D, F, G, building services works, external works, and soft landscaping works, and additional energy conservation, green and recycled measures as set out in the paper. Mr. Chung, which paragraph are you referring to? Page 5. Page 5. Oh, you're on paragraph 12. Yes. Why they need $240.5 million for building services works? What is the difference between landscaping and greening? Why should they be separated into two items? And what about ventilation, etc.? And then for furniture and equipment, may I refer you to enclosure 11. Well, what about your security system? And for contingency, $30 million. Plus provision for price adjustment, totaling a quarter of the total cost. So are you actually inflating the budget? And then for J, item J, remuneration of resident site staff, you're contracting this out. You're not going to build it yourself. So why $23.3 million for the workers? What sort of workers will be hired?
Undersecretary. Thank you, Mr. Chung. I'd like to defer to Mr. Donnelly of the Hospital Authority to take your 4 questions. Chief Manager, thank you. I will try to take the questions because I don't think I have heard everyone clearly. Building services works. From the footnote, you can see they comprise electrical installations, ventilation, and air conditioning, fire services, installation, and lifts. So not just lifts. And then external works and soft landscaping works. We are talking about all works on the outside of the building. And we are talking about planting trees and landscaping and additional energy conservation, green and recycled measures. These have to do with environment protection, and this is a routine. But what does it mean? Because you just list an item here and you're asking for $7.5 million. Mr. Lee, in para 27, we talk about energy conservation. Those are the things that are included. This is in para 26. As for furniture and equipment, I did not hear the question clearly. But then with regard to air supply and cool water supply or chilled water circulation, aren't those included in D, building services works? Because are you duplicating that in G, additional energy conservation? You mean chilled water circulation is not for energy conservation? Mr. Chairman, I don't think I have time for an answer. I think I need a detailed analysis or a breakdown of what kind of machinery we are using and how much we are talking about. Or else I'm afraid there will be some duplication between the items. If you want to save energy, of course you go for some kind of air conditioning, but then I think you are repeating the entries. Mr. Lee, do you get the question? Yes, we do. Now I do. Additional energy conservation does not duplicate with building services works. That is why we have two items. No, what Mr. Chung is asking is for a breakdown. And he is asking why you are including an additional expenditure for energy conservation and why that would not duplicate with the building services works. This is the example cited by Mr. Chung. And Mr. Chung pointed out that between F and G, landscaping in F and green measures in G, shouldn't they be regarded to be duplicating, at least on the surface? Well, I like to explain that there is no duplication because when we say additional, it means additional, meaning chilled water circulation system and the automatic monitoring system for this. Even if we do not use this system, we have to spend some money. And if we use the system, there will be an additional cost, and this is factored into G. Mr. Chung, how would you like to follow up the question? Can you listen to my 4 questions again carefully when you go back and give me detailed answers, because this is the Finance Committee. Under Secretary, can you do that, or are you clear what you have to do, even if you are willing? I don't want to waste more time of the meeting. If they are not clear, they can come to me to get the questions. Under Secretary, why don't you respond to Mr. Chung? Yes, if necessary, we can supply information afterwards. Mr. Chung asked another question about contingency. Normally, it is 10% of the project cost, and here it only averaged out to 6%. I don't understand the question. 20-odd million. No, 200 million. The entire project costs only about 800 million. How come the contingency takes up 16%, or did I do my sums incorrectly? Under Secretary, can you answer the question? Yes, I can defer to Mr. Lee to answer the question. Mr. Lee, contingencies, 35.4 million. But you have provision for price adjustment, don't you? Well, that is for projection of inflation, but it's your usual practice to put down 20% of the project cost for provision for price adjustment. No, this is not calculated on the basis of a percentage. But as we say in para 15, we look at the phased expenditure. And remuneration of resident site staff, 23 million. What are you talking about? Well, that contingency is really for contingency. In other words, to make preparation for unforeseeable circumstances. Well, resident site staff, we are talking about site supervisors. But if you build it yourselves, if you do it by the ASD, then you don't need to have resident staff. Whoever builds it, we need residential site staff. Mr. Chung, you can line up for a second round because your time is already used up. Mr. Wong Kwok Hing. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I support the project. Just now, Mr. Chan Chi-chin said something. I'd like to say something in response. I hope it will be minuted, and I need a response from the Secretary. Mr. Chan Chi-chin said that he would like to fight for the right of homosexuals to donate blood. I respect that, because he is a homosexual. Well, this is understandable, and that is why he is raising this. But I like the Bureau to give an undertaking. If later on you're going to change the blood donation policy, In other words, you are going to depart from the present practice. I hope the government will promise that first you have to write a document to give the justifications to the Legislative Council for discussion. And you must consult the public. Because if you were to change the existing practice, I believe members of the public will be very concerned. Also, those who receive blood transfusion will also be concerned. They want to know the source of the blood transfused to them. I think the blood transfusion recipients will certainly ask that question. This will represent a major policy change. I believe we should first consult members of the public and the Legislative Council. Can you give that undertaking? Undersecretary, thank you, Mr. Wong, for your remark. If we are going to change the policy about blood donation, I think the Red Cross has established procedures and practices to follow. As Dr. Lee said, he has already started the discussion. We will certainly act according to procedures for changing policies. Thank you. I hope to put on record that if later on there might indeed be this change, before you make that decision, you have to consult the public and the Legislative Council. Undersecretary, can you give that undertaking? Undersecretary, if there will be this policy change, I believe the Red Cross will inform the Bureau and we will give a report to the Legislative Council at the appropriate time. Mr. Albert Chen, Chairman, from what Mr. Wong Kwok Heng said, we can see how members of this council are removed from the Times and how they discriminate against homosexuals. If you talk about the risk of blood donation, even national leaders may be posing risks if they donate blood. There are recent reports saying that because of promiscuity of certain national leaders, including members of the Politburo, some of them may be affected with AIDS. Does it mean that if they were to donate blood, we have to ask questions about promiscuity and also how high-ranking they are in the political ladder, and also whether there should be investigation into promiscuity with women who are affected with AIDS? If you don't look at the risk itself, but only from the sexual orientation point of view, I'm sure it is absolutely discriminatory, and we should be ashamed of ourselves as a council if a member is saying that. Now I come to my two questions. One on blood donation. Starting from the age of 18, I always donate blood. During a period, I donated blood 4 times a year. But because I had to take medication against hypertension, I was prevented from blood donation. And I asked doctors, actually hypertension is not a serious illness. I have been refused to give blood for over 10 years. I'd like to ask about the policy. If there are measures that I can take, say if I don't take the medication for 3 days, then I should be able to donate blood. I hope there will be clear guidelines for the public to follow. I have been asking around and I said whether I can donate blood if I don't take the medication for 2-3 days. But the nurses on duty could not answer my question. I hope to have those guidelines. Secondly, the building costs and the responsibility. If I look at the statutory position of the Red Cross, it is a branch of the China Red Cross, but it has a lot of autonomy, and you also involved in youth development, international services, international leadership training, and overseas exchanges, etc. The thing is, why is it that Hong Kong taxpayers have to foot the almost the entire bill for Red Cross expansion? Why do we have to foot such a high ratio of the fee for expansion? Was this the same arrangement before 1997? And how do we compare with the Red Cross headquarters at other places? Do those headquarters have a similar relationship with those governments in other places? Under Secretary, thank you. I can ask Dr. Lee of the Red Cross to answer the first question to see whether there are special guidelines. Secondly, about China Red Cross, we explained briefly. Actually, Dr. Lee did that a moment ago. Because this BTS serves the public of Hong Kong, so all along it belongs to medical organizations in Schedule 2 managed by the hospital authority. Of course, the Red Cross also foots part of the bill. Normally, the hospital authority will talk to the Red Cross, and normally speaking, the guideline is for Red Cross to pay 20% of the bill. But there are other similar medical organizations in Schedule 2 which are not required to pay up to 20% because that depends on their financial position. Should Dr. Lee answer the first question? Yes, please. Dr. Lee. Thank you, Chairman. We have guidelines for blood donation, and they include hypertension and other diseases. There are two aspects. One, to protect the safety of the donor. Two, to protect the safety of the recipient. With regard to hypertension, we have taken reference from overseas information recently, and there may be some changes. Most importantly, the donor should be able to control the blood pressure. Some people who are still under hypertension medication can again donate blood. I hope you will make a decision early, because I have not been able to donate blood for 10 years, and in fact my hypertension is not serious. But of course, if I'm at meetings and I have CCY Leung, my blood pressure may shoot up. Second round. First member, Sin Chung Kai. I'm still asking about international practices. I still don't get it. Two questions. Number one, the ownership. Just now, Dr. Lee said that this is pegged to the hospital authority. Well, I can understand that because you serve the people of Hong Kong. But what is the statutory position? Should they really take directions from the hospital authority if you give them the assets and they serve Hong Kong, and later on if there are problems, well, this may be out of the blue, but if they say, I don't serve Hong Kong anymore, then what can you do about the assets?
If they don't provide services to Hong Kong, what will your instructions be? That's my concern. Secondly, I'm also concerned about the standard of blood transfusion. The Red Cross must have a standard. They may follow the international standard or the standard of the China Red Cross. I assume that you have a standard, you follow the international standard. What is the international standard? What will you accept? What will you reject? For those with hypertension or those who are homosexuals, are you following the international standard? Professor Chan? Concerning the scenarios that you mentioned, the hospital authority has established guidelines. And for the second question, I'll defer to Mr. Lee. Well, I'll invite Mr. Donald Lee to answer that question about the Red Cross not providing services to Hong Kong anymore. Well, at least we're giving them 80% of the cost. So who will answer this question? Mr. Donald Lee. Well, Mr. Chairman, this is known as the Red Cross BTS headquarters, but in fact, it's part of HA services. They're just like the Kwang Wah Hospital, the United Christian Hospital, and so forth. The site belongs to the Red Cross itself, but because of the contract between Red Cross and us, the site has been handed to the HA for management and control. When the site was granted to the Red Cross, is for a BTS center. Well, if that's no longer the case, the government can resume the land. So there's no question of they using the site for another use. The site and the structures have been handed to the HA for management and control. So everything is operated by the HA. The Red Cross does not participate in day-to-day operations. What about their staff? Red Cross staff or HA staff? HA staff. For the next question, I'll invite Dr. Lee to answer. For the blood transfusion center, the Red Cross observes the guidelines for non-remunerated blood donation. As regards safety and standards, we introduce the best standards from all over the world. We've introduced the Australian standard for our blood center to provide the best services to members of the public of Hong Kong. And when overseas jurisdictions update their standards, we'll study those later standards and see whether we should introduce them into Hong Kong. But what about the donors? Whom to accept and whom to reject? What guidelines do you have? Well, we'll look at the data for local infectious diseases, whether we have the information, and whether any tests and indicators can be adopted for blood donation. Mr. Frankie Yik, when Mr. Donnelly answered Mr. Tony J's question, you said that part of the site belongs to the LCSD, but after completing this expansion block, will you hand that back to the LCSD? Well, the LCSD has lent that portion to us on a permanent basis and is now used by the Red Cross. Well, in the land grant is still a borrowed site, uncompensated land site. Well, there's a space between the red frame and the black line. Well, we're of course within the red line. The borrowed portion is within the red line. Well, next time, can you give us a drawing to show which portion is the borrowed site? Why is it that you can use it on a permanent basis? Well, I don't understand. As regards the expanded portion at the entrance, there's a small space. What's the height of that space? At the entrance, well, 2-story high. 2-story high. Apparently, it's not that high. You can't give me the exact height. Well, about 1.5 stories. Well, a little bit more than 5 meters. All right, the third question. Well, after the expansion, when compared with the existing area, how much more floor space will you have? At the moment, 8,000 odd square meters. In future, 18,000 odd square meters. More than 2 times. Is it necessary for such an increase? Yes, because the existing 8,000 odd square meters is not enough for our use. And given the storage space required for the blood donated, we do need that space. Mr. Tony Tse, well, for the cost, $900 odd million. Does that include the refurbishment and renovation of the existing headquarters? Well, the existing headquarters was built in 1984. I don't know for how long that can be put to use. Well, after renovation, I believe you can use it for a longer period of time. Well, if you take into account the additional 20-odd years, it may add up to a total of 60 years. The existing building is not that tall, so it may not be very desirable to use it on a prolonged basis. For the relationship between the existing headquarters and the expanded wing, I really don't know the details. I would like to know more about connectivity. Can we have more information next time? I'm concerned about the expanded floor area. The existing floor area is around 8,000 square meters, or around 10,000 square meters. Well, the existing building is quite old, so we would like to have very good connectivity between the old and new blocks. As regards this Red Cross TBS headquarters and its relationship with the hospital authority, just now something was mentioned, but this is not so clear in the paper, and we're keen to know more. The Red Cross headquarters is being built on another site. If I remember correctly, it should be completed soon, in 2015. Now, this Red Cross BTS headquarters is different. In 1984, the site was granted to Hong Kong Red Cross, I believe. But just now we learned that actually is the HA operating it. The operational costs are mostly borne by the Hong Kong government. Now, this is our concern. I believe in future the HA will be responsible for its operation as well. Can we have some supplementary information from the HA in this regard? And the Secretary, concerning the relationship between the hospital authority and the Hong Kong Red Cross Blood Transfusion Service headquarters, what about their legal relations, who possess the assets, etc.? Can you give us a paper? Because quite a number of members have asked about these. Yes, Mr. Chairman, we can provide supplementary information. Under the Hospital Authority Ordinance, there are certain medical institutions under Schedule 2. This is not a new arrangement. The Red Cross is just like Kwong Wai Hospital, Buddhist Hospital, and Pok Ai Hospital, with established arrangements, and all these are under statutory control. Yes, we can provide supplementary information. Maybe she should clarify whether or not repair and maintenance costs are covered here. And we should have supplementary drawings also. They shouldn't jump the floor, so to speak, because we want to know the connectivity between the old and new blocks. And the Secretary, have you heard him? Apart from legal issues, Mr. Tse is also concerned about other aspects. My understanding is that he doesn't want to see you adopt makeshift measures or temporary measures. Now, the existing block is 30-odd years old, so you would like to have the expansion. And he doesn't want to see in future that you're not maximizing the use of space. So please give us a supplementary paper. We don't want to block you to go to the FC, but before the FC meeting, please give us a supplementary paper. Well, what about repair and maintenance costs? Already covered, Mr. Chairman. All right, so under Secretary, you owe us 2 papers. Round 1, Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Chairman. I think for the major direction, we all agree that this BTS headquarters needs to be expanded. We understand that. Hong Kong Red Cross has different administrative departments. For example, in the Admiralty Station area, the Red Cross also have a headquarters base. Have they taken this opportunity to review the situation? Can they put all the administrative departments of the Red Cross together so as to maximize the use of land? Under Secretary? Thank you, Chairman. As far as I understand, the other administrative departments of the Red Cross are not related to the HA. So in this exercise, we focus mainly on the expansion as well as enhanced services for this headquarters, BTS headquarters. Well, Mr. Chairman, 80% of the project cost will be subvented by the government, by the public coffers. But given the many administrative departments of the Red Cross, I would like to know whether they can be reshuffled. For example, in Admiralty Station area, we have a site occupied by Red Cross. I don't know the details about that site. Well, as this is to be a BTS headquarters, if we can take this opportunity to reorganize the various administrative departments of the Red Cross, it would be desirable. Perhaps I should defer to Dr. Lee of the Red Cross. Well, just now the question was on the management by the HA. And members also mentioned this new headquarters building in West Kowloon. I understand that the administrative department would be relocated to West Kowloon. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, what about the planning direction of the Red Cross for the various administrative departments scattered on different sites? Will they be grouped together in West Kowloon in future? Under Secretary, in your supplementary papers, perhaps you should consider how to explain this issue to us. All right. Second round again, Mr. Christopher Chung. Well, Mr. Chairman, I have to repeat that I want answers to my 4 questions. In particular, for Paris 28 and 29, they mentioned $7.5 million. Is it the same as item G?
If that's the case, then what about the additional energy conservation and greening? Are they going to be for free, or are they also shown at other places in the paper as to what they are? If this is the same as what is in 26 and 27, then what is the cost? And if that's the case, then F, external works and soft landscaping works, $13.7 million. Where have you given the details for this item? I think everything is quite confusing. Also, when you go to the FC, I hope you can give me a very detailed table telling us how many people you have to engage. Why do you need $23.3 million in terms of resident staff? Under Secretary, I think Mr. Chung is assisting you to understand what he asked in the first round. I don't know whether you are now clearer with the question. He is now focusing on the different entries and whether there is any duplication among them. If not, you have to explain that there is none. I think that is what he means. Now, I don't know whether Ms. Anissa Wong or Mr. Hon Chi Kang, PS for development and PS for the environment, whether you can give assistance to Mr. Chung. But I don't want time to be wasted here, but my judgment is that Mr. Chung's question has not been answered. Under Secretary, would you like us to wait for your paper to come to us? Thank you, Mr. Chung. Chairman, my understanding of Mr. Chung's question is such that he would like us to give more details on the different entries listed. I believe Mr. Lee of the Hospital Authority will attempt to do that. We can supplement the information later. Well, I'm aware that Mr. Chung is very generous. He says he can give you time. If you want to know how you can satisfy his demand when you write the paper, you can make an appointment with him. Is that right? Okay, yes, Under Secretary. Next one, Mr. Wong Kok Heng. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to respond to Mr. Albert Chan's remarks. He smears me by saying that I discriminate against homosexuals. I find that regrettable. I was very clear with my remarks. I already said that I would respect Mr. Chen Chi-kung's remarks which seek to fight for the rights of homosexuals. I was very clear. I said if there was to be a policy change, and in fact the administration has already promised that according to the procedures they would do consultation. I find it regrettable that Mr. Albert Chan's remarks were quite smearing. And in fact, I think that Mr. Chan, when he spoke, he talked about AIDS and promiscuity. I think in his subconscious, he discriminates against homosexuals. I think Mr. Albert Chan should clarify that point, or else I think his remarks are problematic. Thank you. Members, let us come back to this item on the expansion of the Hong Kong Red Cross BTS headquarters. But I will not stop members from speaking up, but please know where to draw the line. Mr. Albert Chan, Chairman, Mr. Wong Kok Heng may subconsciously misunderstands and discriminates against homosexuality, and secondly, he did not listen to me carefully. I was talking about promiscuity involving national leaders. The promiscuity was so serious that there were reports on AIDS. You can contract AIDS even if you engage in heterosexual behavior, including national leaders. Mr. Wong distorts and misinterprets my remarks to try to protect national leaders blindly. I don't know whether national leaders are involved in promiscuity, but then there are reports in the media that one very beautiful and famous personality was detected to have AIDS, and some high-ranking officials may be involved. But maybe the FTU members may not be reading news that are disadvantageous to national leaders. Now coming back to the paper. The paper mentions that the entire project will cost about $30,000 for 1 square meter, but that is for 2014 prices. I understand you are being selective in writing your paper, but that is not the price at the completion date. So instead of talking about 2014 prices, you should supplement by saying that the final price would be so and so at money of the day prices. In fact, together with furniture and equipment, it's going to cost $80,000 per square meter. And I'm talking about furniture included. So if you just say the building cost at 2014 prices is so and so, I think that is a little misleading. I asked a question about Red Cross at other places and whether their BTS are subvented in a similar mode. The question was not answered. Can we be given some information? If you don't have the information, you should give us a paper after the meeting so we know how Red Cross in other places are subsidized. I'm not objecting to this paper, but I need the information. And also, please take the time to answer this question. I know that 2 years ago, the Red Cross did not appoint the CE's wife to be the patron. I don't know whether you are under any political pressure this time around to reappoint or to appoint CY Leung's wife to be the patron by seeking this particular funding. But I respect T.Y. Yang, who is now the patron. Thank you for the questions. The first one is about price calculation. Maybe Mr. Lee of the HA can supplement. Mr. Lee, the present practice is the usual practice. But if members would like a calculation done on money of the day prices basis, we can do that. Second question, as the paper says, our focus is that there is insufficient space at the PTS headquarters, and secondly, also because of the lack of space, laboratories using new technology cannot be built. That is why we need the expansion project. The entire paper focuses on the expansion project. Hopefully the PWSC can support us. Well, Undersecretary, I hope you can understand this. You know that the Director of Audit did a report on the relationship between private hospitals and the government, including land lease arrangements. My observation and my understanding of members' questions today is also in that direction, and that is they are trying to delineate the relationship between the government and Red Cross, particularly in terms of asset ownership and separation of accounts, etc. Mr. Albert Chan asked a specific question. He was asking about Red Cross headquarters in other places and what is the government's committed sum in those places. If you can't answer the question right away, don't even attempt to answer it. Why don't you include the information in the paper to be submitted? Can you answer the question now? I'd like to see whether Dr. Lee has the information. If not, we can supplement the information later. Dr. Lee, I only know that if the government in a certain place appoints the Red Cross to be responsible for blood transfusion services, like in Australia, then the government concerned will provide the resources. But I don't know about the detailed arrangements. Can I trouble you to do some work afterwards so that the PWSC, including Mr. Albert Chan, will get to know how Red Cross centers in other places are in a similar relationship with those governments as the one in Hong Kong? Whether you're under any political pressure. Undersecretary, political question, it should be taken up by you. As I said just now, this project is about expansion of the Hong Kong Red Cross BTS headquarters. Mr. Tony Jie, thank you. A very quick one, a follow-up. Just now you clarified that the 900 million includes refurbishment of the existing headquarters. I'd like to seek further clarification. Enclosure 11, the systems there, including card access control system, security system, telephone system, are they included? Certainly, the card access control system, Chairman, it's costing $6.5 million. I don't think it only applies to the new annex. Would it also apply to the existing buildings? That's for clarification, please. Undersecretary, I defer to Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, they are included, Chairman. Even the existing headquarters are included. Good. If members have no other questions, I will put this item to the vote. Those in favor of the proposal? Those against? I think the majority of the members voting are in support of the item. The item is endorsed. Does any member request for singling out this paper for voting at the Finance Committee? I don't see any hands. We'll wait for the government papers to come. We will circulate those papers once they are available, and then members can indicate their wish to the clerk. Item 2 on the agenda, Head 708, Capital Subventions and Major Systems and Equipment. This is PWSC 2015-16, Paper 2, Refurbishment of Hong Kong Buddhist Hospital. Members are invited to recommend to FC the upgrading of 3MQ to Cat A at an estimated cost of $563.3 million in money of the day prices for the refurbishment of the Hong Kong Buddhist Hospital. On the 19th of May, the administration consulted the panel on health services about this project, and members supported this project. And according to members' request, the administration has already provided supplementary information in paras 8 to 11 of the paper, and the gist of the discussion of the panel are included in our table for your information. And attending for this item, we have the Undersecretary and also officials from the ASD and the Bureau and also Hospital Authority. Undersecretary, can you walk us through the paper? Thank you, Chairman. This is about refurbishment of the Hong Kong Buddhist Hospital, and we hope to have the support of the PWSC. The estimated cost is $563.3 million. There are a few items included in this project. There are 4 blocks. The Buddhist Hospital was completed in 1970 with 4 blocks. 2 blocks provide clinical services, and then the other 2 provide Chinese medicine services and also accommodate staff. But we would like to upgrade the competency of the Buddhist Hospital to provide care, and because of the aging of the population, we have more chronic and palliative care requirements. And therefore, we believe that its services, particularly palliative care, will not be able to take care of demand. That is why in this project, we are going to refurbish 11 existing inpatient wards in blocks A and B. And also, we convert the 6th floor of blocks A and B into new inpatient wards to accommodate 130 additional beds. We are also going to refurbish Block D for reprovisioning of staff accommodation. Also, we are going to convert 2 floors of Block C for day rehabilitation, geriatric day services, and pilot integrative medicine in palliative care. Since we are going to provide more clinical services, we need to construct a covered link bridge between blocks B and C. Also, we are going to refurbish some departments, offices, and ancillary facilities. And also next to Block B, we are going to build a new lift tower. There will be 2 additional bed passenger lifts in this new lift tower. In terms of the time frame, we hope to start the refurbishment project in mid-2015 for completion in the 3rd quarter of 2019.
Perhaps I should stop here for a moment. I urge members to support the projects. Ms. Chan Yuen-Han, Mr. Chairman, I support the project. Because of filibustering in the last term, they had to retender the project. What about the time frame previously promised? What about the completion date? Will there be any change? We don't belong to that district, but we do rely on Buddhist Hospital. In 2003-04, it was in difficulty. It was adhered to different clusters of hospitals. And for the second question, all along, as the Undersecretary knows, be it the Buddhist Hospital or the other hospital in the district, even with so many complaints, the facilities and services are still lacking. What about the medical and healthcare services for the grassroots? Many elderly persons do need these services. I wonder who can answer these questions. Well, Under Secretary, you can decide who to answer the questions. Thank you, Chairman. There was a slippage of over 10 months. So there will be a slippage for 10 months also for this project, right? Yes, because we had to re-tender the project. During those 10 months, there's nothing we could do. Last year, we could not come to the PWSC. We did not obtain your approval. So all of you were sitting there doing nothing. Well, the residents in the district were asking us, well, the tendering deadline expired. I know. I have to tell the residents that they have to wait for 10 more months. Yes, so we're 10 months late. And what about the emergency department and night services? We understand the requests of the Wang Tai Sin residents. As you said, on a number of occasions, you mentioned the same issue. Now we're reviewing Kowloon Central, covering the service demands in Wang Tai Sin and at Buddhist Hospital. Due to the aging problem, demands have grown. Different hospitals have different positioning. And we're to have a new hospital in Kai Tak. Well, don't talk about Kai Tak. It may be 10 years from now. Don't tell the residents to wait for another decade after they've waited for a decade already. So don't tell us that you have a general hospital in Kai Tak. So what about Buddhist Hospital and the other hospital in Wang Tai Sin? I understand that the government hospitals don't have enough manpower. Can you think of other solutions? 10 years. The elderly persons have waited for 10 years already, and you're asking them to wait for another 10 years. The elderly suffer from illnesses often. Well, we're not asking you to wait for another 10 years. We're reviewing our services. You've not been listening to the views of the Wang Tai Sin District Council. Chairman, let me tell you this. The whole Wang Tai Sin DC is very angry. They wanted to write to the CE to complain. Why is it that emergency services and night services have not been improved? And you're now telling them to wait for another 10 years. They want to write to the CE. Please go back and review this. Dr. Ko Wing-man understands this very well. And the Secretary, do you remember in Chuk Yuen South Estate, we got this residents gathering where they complained seriously? Chairman, well, I won't block you or obstruct you, but I would like to put on record, I want the government to know this. Don't ask us to wait for another 10 years for the new hospital in Kai Tak to be completed. I don't know whether the elderly persons can wait for so long. Ms. Chen Yunhan, your views have already been recorded. Now we're on Buddhist Hospital. As for your concern, you can follow up on that on other occasions. And the Secretary, would you please relay Ms. Chen Yunhan's views to Dr. Ko Wing-man. Concerning the hospital clusters, previously I heard from the Secretary that the clusters of hospitals may be reshuffled. Well, Mr. Chairman, if you so wish, I can further explain. Well, no, not for the moment. Well, I'll wait for another round, Mr. Chairman. Now, we're not discussing policies at the moment. Mr. Chen Kam Lam, Mr. Chairman, we of course want this project to start as soon as possible and be completed as soon as possible, because Wong Tai Sin and Kowloon City residents have been anxiously waiting for this. Well, basically for blocks A, B, C, and D, they are to undergo refurbishment to different extents. Well, the patients and staff will definitely be affected. How are you going to minimize the nuisance caused to them? Well, in the paper you say that you minimize the disturbance, but the whole project is quite huge in scale. You mention perennial spoiling, seepage, and so forth. So it's not as simple as, say, repainting the walls and ceilings. Maybe the pillars and ceilings have to be scratched all the way down to the steel bars before you can have a full refurbishment. So how will you minimize disturbance? Secondly, huge cost involved. Have you ever considered demolishing 1 or 2 blocks and redevelop them? You may attain a high degree of improvement if you do so. And you're going to spend 4 odd years on this particular project. I think the time frame is more or less the same as demolishing 1 or 2 blocks. Well, who will answer this? Ms. Sheck? Well, I'll give a brief answer and then defer to Ms. Sheck. Mr. Chairman, you're correct. We'll try to minimize the impact on patient services. Well, basically, there are 24 parts for this project, and we'll complete the project stage by stage. 9 out of the 24 items are not directly related to patient services. They're mainly on offices. 15 are related to patient services. First floor of Block A will be used for some sort of decanting. Ms. Sheck, as the Undersecretary said, the project will be phased. We'll first complete those works not affecting patients, and then we'll proceed to other phases. The premise is that hospital services will not be affected. For the 24 parts, if there's slippage, the ensuing stages will also be delayed, and then we'll cover outpatient services as well as inpatient services. As for the other question, I'll defer to Mr. Lee. Yes, Mr. Lee, we've reassessed whether or not we should have a redevelopment or refurbishment. Even if we are to have a new block, given the building height restriction, the floor area attained will be more or less the same. As for the structure of the blocks, it's not too bad. So by way of refurbishment, we'll be able to reinstate the blocks into a healthy condition. So in order to maximize the use of public resources, we believe refurbishment is more cost-effective than redevelopment. Mr. Chen Kam-lang, I hope that in the course of this project, you try to adopt sufficient precautionary measures against, say, dust. Well, I believe a number of walls will have to be torn down, so dust, ashes, etc. may be produced. So I just want to do things as well as possible. And then for refurbishment, at every floor, some beds may have to be taken away first. So will those beds be transferred to other hospitals? Or will you adopt other measures? Under Secretary, well, no problem for this. For this project, in terms of design and the contract with the contractor will pay attention to these details. Next, Mr. Tony Tse. Thank you, Chairman. I, of course, support the funding proposal such that the Buddhist hospital will enhance the quality of its services. Paragraph 10 of the paper indicates that before and after the refurbishment, but the Buddhist hospital will continue to provide healthcare services in Kowloon, as well as convalescent and rehabilitation support in the KCC. I want to know whether there will be any impact on the service standards and levels. As for greening and so forth, you're more focused on the systems themselves. Well, we understand that many rehabilitating patients are living in the Buddhist hospital. So I believe they should provide more greened areas. Apparently, this is neglected in the paper. Maybe you should make use of the rooftops or vertical greening. Have they considered these? Under Secretary, the first question is about the positioning of the hospital after refurbishment. Well, there will be an additional 130 convalescent and rehabilitation beds. We hope that these will be able to address the future demands. But the positioning of the hospital itself will not change. As for greening, I'll defer to Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee? Chairman, concerning greening, the Buddhist hospital site is rather small. There's only a small pitch and a few trees. So the greening area will also be quite small in future. Well, Mr. Chairman, I understand that the existing greened area won't be reduced, but during the refurbishment process, will they also consider increasing the greened areas?
I think we asked a similar question before the holidays, and the ASD said that even for government buildings, if there are refurbishment projects, it will try its best to increase greening, and especially for a convalescent hospital. I think this is good for the site of it, and also it has a practical function. Here you only say that you want to conserve energy and you talk about greening, but listening to you, it seems you are only going to preserve what you already have. It seems you're not going to add any greening. But I think you should consider it when there is a refurbishment project. Under Secretary, thank you, Mr. Chair. The HA can certainly consider that. Thank you. Next one, Wu Chi-Wai. Thank you, Chairman. At the Wong Tai Sin District Council, there was this consensus about emergency services, and it had said that it should be available as soon as possible. It is said that after refurbishment, there will be 30 acute beds. I'd like to ask about these 30 acute beds. What is the use of them, and what are they going to be used for? Since you call them acute beds, does it mean that they will be equipped with certain medical equipment so that later on, when Buddhist Hospital has the resources, it can provide night acute services? Secondly, as members asked, given the geographical location of the Buddhist hospital is in an ideal site, even though it's a small site, next to the Buddhist hospital, there is a staff quarters building. I'd like to know more about the land on which the staff quarters stands. Why doesn't Buddhist hospital try to secure the land for the staff headquarters as part of its area? And you say you can add 130 additional beds because you are going to convert the 6th floor of blocks A and B, which are staff accommodation areas. What kind of staff facilities are you talking about here, and is it that they are replaced in an appropriate way so that the staff working conditions will not suffer as a result? Undersecretary. Yes, first question. Thank you, Mr. Wu. The 30 acute beds, they are not new. They are here. Maybe Ms. Curia Shek can say more about the use of these 30 acute beds. Ms. Shek, Chairman. This is a joint replacement center giving support to patients who have undergone surgery, because we do have a joint replacement center at the hospital, and the 30 beds will still be for this kind of use. Sorry, can I ask a follow-up? Since they are called acute beds, they should not be beds for the joint replacement center. Can you clarify the concepts? If someone has an acute disease, can we try to help them through this refurbishment project so that there will be night acute services? Ms. Shek? Maybe I can explain like this. The joint replacement center means that it is going to receive patients who would undergo surgery on the 5th floor. And since people have undergone surgery, these beds which receive them are called acute beds. Mr. Wu was asking about A&E services or night A&E services. I think we are talking about two different things. The other two questions, staff accommodation and staff facilities, are they replaced? I can ask Mr. Lee of the HA to comment on staff accommodation. As for staff facilities, that's true. In blocks A and B, there are staff changing rooms and also common rooms for staff who are taking very close shifts. But then in block D, we are going to re-provision these facilities. Second question, Mr. Lee of HA. Mr. Lee, I don't know whether Mr. Wu is talking about another site next to the Buddhist hospital. From what I understand, the staff quarters are for other government departments. We have tried to see whether we could use it, but the GPA told us that the site has been earmarked for use by another government department for development, so it cannot be given to the Buddhist hospital. Mr. Wu, since that site is contiguous to the Buddhist hospital and the hospital has a need to expand its services, I hope before you go to the Finance Committee, you can give us the chance to discuss the use of that site. I don't want under-table dealings between departments. I heard that it would be used for putting up housing blocks. I'd like to clarify that. Since there is such a big demand for medical services in Wong Tai Sin, I think that site should be given to the Buddhist hospital. Before you go to the Finance Committee, Undersecretary, you can try to let us have in writing the communication between the HA and the government property agent, as mentioned by Mr. Lee. Yes, certainly, Chairman. Next one, Mr. Albert Chan. I support the funding request in principle. In planning the refurbishment of the Buddhist hospital, I don't know whether the HA or the government has looked at cluster services. I can see that you also provide ENT, medical and also gynecological services. In other words, some specialist care. But the Buddhist hospital is very badly equipped. Some patients have to wait long and hard for technological examinations, and they might have to seek private care, which is extremely expensive. I understand some services are charged more highly by the hospital authority, of course, than private practices. However, if you can allow Buddhist hospital to have more medical equipment, I'm sure you can help in the delivery of public medical services. I'd like to know, now that we have this refurbishment project, whether you are going to purchase more equipment for ENT, medical and gynecological services, so that you can shorten the waiting time for patients who are waiting for examination and laboratory tests. Undersecretary. Thank you, Mr. Chan. The positioning of the Buddhist hospital is that it is a community hospital. You mentioned ENT and gyno services. In fact, the Buddhist hospital is only there to help as a step-down hospital for QEH. In this refurbishment project, we would like to focus on adding 130 beds for palliative care. But in Para 6, you say very clearly that you provide general and specialist outpatient services which comprise ENT, gynecology, medicine, palliative care, etc. So can you not help the cluster by upgrading the services of the Buddhist hospital through the refurbishment project? Maybe other hospitals in the same cluster may lack such equipment. You are spending $500 million anyway. I know some patients are waiting long and hard because they don't have money to patronize private care. And even at the hospital authority, some examination or lab tests for cancer is very expensive. Why don't you try to upgrade the entire cluster through this refurbishment project? You would be doing so much for the entire cluster. I'm not an expert. I don't know how much more you need to expend, but I think it's a good idea for you to try to upgrade the service of the entire cluster. Undersecretary, in fact, there is a upgrading. We have a GOPC and SOPC, but we also have a day medical center. No, I'm not talking about that, Undersecretary. Maybe you can give me the information after the meeting. I'm talking about the overall upgrading of services through the use of extra equipment. We should not stay the same for 50 years. It seems we are having hospital hegemony here. Those hospital in charge who are influential and powerful will be able to get more resources, and there are other hospitals which only play a secondary role. But I don't think that should be the direction to take. All hospitals should specialize in something. You talk about ENT, gynecology, medicine, etc. So at least you should specialize in maybe 1 or 2 disciplines so you can provide that service in the cluster, so that doctors who work there can be proud and you can give more or better care to the patients. You are spending $500 million anyway, so why don't you take the extra step? Undersecretary, Dr. Coing Man is thinking about restructuring the clusters. Would the Buddhist hospital be repositioned as a result? Well, the Hospital Authority Cluster Review Report is yet to be published. The HA will consider redrawing the boundaries of the clusters, but as far as we know, the positioning or status of the Buddhist hospital will remain the same even after the refurbishment project. Mr. Chan asked about the specialist care that can be provided. I think it is the joint replacement surgery. It's a specialty of the Buddhist hospital. Maybe Ms. Shek would like to add, Chairman. Ms. Shek. Chairman, members. Mr. Chan mentioned ENT and gynecology. Those are not inpatient services. They are SOPC services. Starting from December 2010, we have been operating the joint replacement centers, and we have been helping old people to replace their kneecaps, and the waiting time has been very much shortened. It is not just for KCC, but orthopedic patients from QEH will come to our hospital to do such surgeries, and we are quite renowned for that. Next one, Emily Lau, Chairman. The hospital was built in 1970. It has been over 40 years, and it is said that there has never been any large-scale refurbishment or renovation. Is that a policy on hospitals? That is why it is very dilapidated. There is spoiling and water leakage. Looks like a dangerous building. It is a shame. We are talking about hospitals and schools. The British built the schools, and they are now like limbos. Is that your policy, that hospitals that have been built for 40 to 50 years should not undergo any large-scale renovation projects? And also at number 2, you say that the hospital will continue its existing operation when the refurbishment is underway. If it is necessary to have an impact on existing services, that it will try to minimize the impact. Well, of course, there will be an impact because the hospital will be in operation. How can you minimize the disturbance and impact? Is it that you need more resources to do a better job? I need an answer. Under Secretary, thank you, Ms. Lau. Actually, the hospital authority places the hospitals in a queue for refurbishment and renovation. So the HA monitors the situation closely. Ms. Lau, if you remember, we approved $13 billion for the HA to do small-scale refurbishment projects. Even without the $13 billion, the HA has resources every year to do refurbishment and maintenance. Now, my question is whether there is a policy for hospitals to undergo large-scale refurbishment and renovation if they have been built for a long time. So you are saying no, it will not be such a policy even for the future. This hospital is subject to concrete spoiling and water leakage. I think it's really bad. Shouldn't you have a policy that at 10 years or at whatever years, hospitals should undergo large-scale refurbishment? Is it that we can't afford it? Under Secretary. Thank you, Ms. Lau. Maybe I can ask Mr. Lee of the HA to explain, please. Yes, Chairman. We understand Ms. Lau's view. We understand the situation is not ideal, but very often it is not a matter of resources. When the hospital is in operation, we are under constraints. We would like to see how we can cope with such large-scale projects. It's not just the Buddhist hospital. Together with other hospitals in the same cluster, we have to examine what support can be offered to Buddhist hospital when needed. In this regard, we've already tried our best. Well, Mr. Chairman, his answer is for my second question. Well, there are bound to be impacts. So please go back and examine your hospitals, 10 years old, 15 years old, or whatnot, and when to start a large-scale refurbishment exercise. You must have a plan. I don't want to see in future FC papers which tell us that a 40 or 50-year-old hospital is dilapidated and needs refurbishment. And you have to find services from other hospitals. It's just like you have 5 bottles, but just 4 lids. So, Mr. Chairman, does the Undersecretary know how complicated and difficult this case is? Undersecretary, yes, we understand the situation. We'll try to cope in terms of space and manpower. I'd like to thank Ms. Lau for her views. I'll go back and follow up on them. Next, Dr. Lo Ai Kwok.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to declare that I'm an HA member, but there's no conflict of pecuniary interest. In fact, on the 19th of May last year, the Health Services Panel discussed this issue of refurbishing the Buddhist hospital. It's almost a year since then. They're now coming to the PWSC. It's because previously the vetting process in the PWSC was very slow. I really want them to go to the FC as early as possible and obtain funding. Around 80% of the services of this hospital are for Wong Tai Sin and Kowloon City residents. There will be an 8% demographic growth, but for the younger groups, within the same period, there will be a 40% growth. So I believe they need to enhance their geriatric services. And there are related services required as well. For example, joint replacement, palliative care, and so forth. I would like the Undersecretary to spend some time to explain to us more details related to this refurbishment exercise in terms of geriatric services. What improvement will this project bring forth? Undersecretary? For elderly people, there will be an additional 130 beds for convalescent and rehabilitation services for the chronically ill. And there will be 2 stories for day care rehabilitation services. Given the aging population, 1 or 2 additional hospitals may not be sufficient. We need more daycare services. There will be a daycare geriatric center as well as another center for pioneering services. All these will benefit the elderly as well as the general public. Dr. Low, for the elderly people, palliative care or hospice care is very important. Also, general convalescent services. And connectivity is part of this project. So for the elderly people, connectivity is particularly important. I have no more questions. But Chairman, I'd like to have this endorsed as soon as possible, and I really want the FC to vet this project as soon as possible as well. Mr. To, the Labour Party also supports this refurbishment project. Paragraph 8 mentions demographic growth, but this project is only a refurbishment project, not redevelopment. I don't see any growth in floor area. It's only a number of floors will be refurbished to give another 130 beds. Is it because of crowdedness only for the existing beds? What about the staff members? They also have their needs. All right, there's no additional floor space or floor area, but you get 130 more beds. So how will this impact on crowdedness? Between 2 beds, there should be at least 3 feet to effectively guard against infectious diseases. But from my visits, I observed that for certain beds, there's just 1.5 feet between 2 beds. Well, I'm concerned that that distance may be further shortened. Take for mutation of certain diseases, you may need isolation wards, so you can't have very narrow space between beds, say 1 to 2 feet only. I think we have already learned some lessons from the SARS outbreak. Now, with no additional floor area, but additional beds, how will this impact on crowdedness? Why is it that they cannot build 1 or 2 additional blocks and provide more floor area? Undersecretary, for the number of beds, there are 4 blocks in the Buddhist hospital at the moment. Not all of them have wards and beds. Now, on the 6th floor of blocks A and B, we have staff facilities. Now, the whole floor is for beds. So there's no question of squeezing further existing beds for changing rooms and common rooms as well as offices for staff. They'll be relocated to the ground floor of Block D. As for the service between beds, I'll defer to the hospital authority. Well, Mr. Chairman will adhere to the standard of 3 feet. Well, Ms. Ho asked, why don't you redevelop the hospital to increase floor area? Mr. Lee. Thank you, Chairman. The Buddhist hospital site is small in itself. Even if we are to build a new block, the resultant floor area will still be more or less the same as at present. Well, this is basically a hospital for convalescence and rehabilitation. Well, there are site constraints in terms of floor area. Mr. Chairman, although we support this funding proposal, we would like a supplementary paper from the government when it goes to the FC. For the whole Kowloon East, can they increase the total floor area for hospitals? Otherwise, in the long run, they cannot just ask staff facilities to give way. So a supplementary paper, Undersecretary. The clock indicates that we're 6 minutes from the scheduled ending time. I have 3 more colleagues on the list who would like to speak for a second time. I think if we extend the meeting by 15 minutes, we can conclude this item. Any objection? So I extend the meeting to 10:45 a.m. Second round, Ms. Chen Yunhan. Well, Mr. Chairman, the Undersecretary should answer my complaint just now. Any midterm solution for emergency services? Well, for the grassroots, Buddhist hospital is a rehabilitation hospital. How are you going to enhance the services? Ms. Lau asked a very good question. 130 more beds, but 1 floor will not be used. Who is responsible? Today, they're saying, oh, well, as Sid said, there's no additional floor area. You see, there will be 1 vacant floor. So Ms. Emily Lau's criticism is correct. So, Undersecretary, would you please answer my 3 comments? Undersecretary, thank you, Ms. Chan. Number 1, as I said just now, it's a fact that we're going to have Kai Tak Hospital, but we're not saying that Kai Tak Hospital is the answer to everything. The hospital authority is all along reviewing demands. As you said, I personally went to Wong Tai Sin District Council to listen to the councillors. I went back and did something. For all the hospital clusters in Kowloon, it's not so easy to make changes due to space constraints, etc. The positioning of certain hospitals like Buddhist Hospital and Our Lady of Maryknoll Hospital has already been fixed. So the HA is always looking at demands. As for healthcare services for the grassroots, this is our concern as well. We're now seeing how we can increase basic healthcare services. We do have integrated healthcare centers. We'll do refurbishment as far as possible or enhance services as far as possible. So for primary healthcare services, we're looking at demands. As for your third question, well, Ms. Emily Lau was correct. How can you allow the management not to touch upon a particular hospital for 10 years? It's because of resources. Well, that's not correct. 10 years. Thank you, Undersecretary. You know the problem, but you don't want to prescribe the cure. What happens to the government? What happens to the hospital authority? Not just the 7 hospital clusters. For 20 years, you're not solving the problem. Some hospitals have not been refurbished for 10 years, and you're not providing sufficient primary care. All right, you know the problems. Why is it that you're not prescribing any cure? Any devils behind you? I believe Ms. Chan understands the manpower problem. When you enhance services, you need more manpower. We hope that in future, when we have more manpower, we can address this concern more. Next, Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the Wong Tai Sin District Council, we discussed many times the acute emergency services. Services are not enough. We look at the design of the Buddhist hospital. There are operation theaters. You always tell us that the Lady of Maryknoll Hospital cannot do the operations because they don't have an orthopedic department. But that is also an acute service. The Buddhist hospital should also provide acute emergency services to Wong Tai Sin residents.
And I have dug up an old paper. In fact, the original staff quarters would be converted. It's not just a matter of facility. If there will be conversion of the staff quarters, is it that you have new planning for staff quarters so that you can vacate the original quarters for other uses? Undersecretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wu, for your questions. At any hospital, if we set up an A&E department, there will be different positioning of the hospitals in different clusters. So large-scale hospitals will have A&E departments, but if some hospitals are positioned as community hospitals, they will not have an A&E department. Secondly, there are constraints according to certain standards. A&E departments need to have the support of different medical disciplines. And if the A&E department can effectively function with the necessary support, it needs a big area. At least, it requires 20,000 square meters. So when we plan the different positioning of hospitals in a cluster, we need to make different arrangements. Second question about staff quarters. HA, Mr. Lee. Chairman, Let me explain. The staff quarters in Block D have been provided since the setting up of the Buddhist hospital. After the setting up of the hospital authority, the policy is not to provide staff quarters. So the staff quarters have been rented out at market prices to other people. Now that there is a developmental need, we will convert them back to staff facilities, including changing rooms and rooms for people who are working close shifts. This is why. Chairman, can I follow up? If that's the case, have you maximized the use of the floor area of that block of staff quarters, or that is why you can suddenly find space to add more beds? Undersecretary, Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, after this project, all the floor space will be used. Mr. Albert Chan, I'd like to follow up on my previous question. I don't know whether it is the Buddhist hospital which has no intention to upgrade services through the refurbishment project. As I said, there is hospital hegemony at certain hospitals within the HA. Maybe because of that, the Buddhist hospital is not supported by the HA to upgrade its services, even if it wants to. Just now, it is said that you are proud of the Joint Replacement Center. You would be very happy if you can continue to do that. I'm sure this is absolutely not the wish of the residents of Kowloon East. You have SOPC, all right, but whether it's gynecology or medicine, you can still purchase state-of-the-art equipment so as to upgrade your services. You have to respond to the needs of residents in the area. In Kowloon East now, I'm sure you are not satisfying all the demand. People have been waiting for 40 years now. You have a chance to upgrade your services. You said you are proud of the Joint Replacement Center and you are quite happy to stay that way. What about ENT, gynecology, and medicine? You are not doing anything this time around to upgrade the services. I'd like to know the process. Is it that you are already so happy that the government is helping you to refurbish so that you are blind to the needs of the district? Can you comment? I don't want to block the project, but I'm very angered by your attitude. You should be people-oriented. You should be oriented towards the need of the residents. If there is a shortage of services, you should try to satisfy that demand through this refurbishment project. Undersecretary, thank you, Mr. Chan. Let me explain what the HA is actively doing. We understand there are service gaps in Kowloon East. That is why, and also Kowloon, we are actively restructuring the 3 clusters in Kowloon so that we can satisfy the long-term medical service needs of the entire Kowloon Peninsula. Chairman, I don't want to hold up the meeting. I will support the paper. But before you go to FC, I need the administration to provide the information to us. I'm talking about ENT, gynecology, medicine, and also SOPC. I need to know the waiting time. If patients require certain examination for ENT, gynecology, and medicine, I need to know the waiting time. I'm not an expert and I'm not familiar with the special examination that is required, especially that has to be particularly paid for under these 3 disciplines. The Undersecretary said the HA is trying to upgrade services. I'd like to know in what aspect the refurbishment of Buddhist hospital can close some gaps in service. Without figures, we are not really talking and we are not solving the problem. I need to have that information so we can have another debate at FC. Are you only talking about Kowloon Central Cluster? Yes. only for Kowloon Center or Central Cluster. I need to know what the service gaps are and whether the refurbishment project can meet some of the needs. Undersecretary, can you do that? We can supplement information, but Chairman, if you would allow me, I'd like to say that the refurbishment project really seeks to add 130 beds and also the geriatric daycare center. If we are talking about ENT, gynecology, etc., those are not the major services provided by Buddhist Hospital. If it is not repositioned, then these services are not to be developed. Well, this is not an excuse for not doing anything. Even if you don't change the positioning of Buddhist Hospital, well, I think the Undersecretary has heard us, and I think you're picking a fight. Wu Chi-Wai, I'd like to seek some information, please. I hope the HA can comment on this. I can see that you are mainly making use of the staff quarters in Block D for providing new services. I'd like you to provide information on the conversion aspect. Can you tell me how you are rearranging the space for providing new services? Undersecretary. Thank you, Mr. Wu. I'd just like to get the information. Mr. Lee? Chairman, we can provide the information after the meeting. Fine. Before the FC, please give us the information we have asked for. Does any other member have a question? If members have no other questions, I will put this project to the vote. Those in favor? Those against? I think the majority of members voting are in support of the proposal. The proposal is endorsed. We will review the information to be provided by the government before we will decide whether the item should be singled out for voting. And no one is asking for that now. Since we only have 5 minutes left, I don't think we should go into the third item. Out of the 3 items on the agenda, we have taken care of 2, and the next meeting will be held on the 15th of April, next Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. Thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned.